Welcome everyone. So we might as well get started. We still have a heavy agenda ahead of us. So we'll start off with the, we initiate the Planning and Strategic Initiatives Committee, item number 1, which is a consent item, and that's the parts for Midtown Plan. Initially it was deferred from the October 16th meeting. There is a delegation, so we will have to pull it out anyways, even though it is consent. So can I have Michelle, please? Michael, please. Do we need to? Do I have to? Okay. All right. Can I get motion by Councillor Marsh? All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. So. Hi. Michael, please, yes.
My name is Michael Brisson.
Brisson, okay, excellent.
Okay, I wasn't clear whether...
Mr. Brisson, you have 5 minutes to make your delegation, so the comments that you're going to make, you have 5 minutes to make, after which the committee will have opportunity to ask questions of you, and then we'll proceed on with the item. So go ahead whenever you're ready.
So I don't mean to be impertinent, but the other members of council, will they be returning?
I can't say. We are starting the meeting, and
okay.
Yeah, we have quorum, which is you need 6 members of council to proceed, which we are.
Fine. I made the effort to come here because of a strong feeling I have that you're at a watershed point. With this particular situation having to do with the parts plans. By the way, I'm a Kitchener kid who got lucky, got an incredible education in planning and architecture. I'm a registered architect. I know the field. I know the best people in the field, and I've been fortunate to have had that kind of an opportunity. I made the effort to come here. I haven't been here since the early 90s. I don't come unless I think something's extremely important. What I think is extremely important for council to think about is that my observation is that this parts planning process is excellent work and is the best planning work that I've seen happen here in a very long time. But the process that I saw take place with the best of intentions during the process, and I participated in the meetings and the roundtables that have taken place, was that the best intention of the parts plans, which was to create a fine-grained network and a street pattern and service lanes for the future of the city, was diminished during the process as special interests came forward to ask not to have a street here, a lane here on their property. The worst of which, and the reason I'm here, is the situation you got into with Airbus. Now, this city, like all cities, has got a history of streets that used to be there that they've been privatized. They were actually owned by the citizens, by us. Lanes, they've been closed. They're now owned by private property. That includes the Airbus property. Now, what I'd like to suggest to you is that as you go forward with the parts process, and by the way, I know a lot of architects, the architects of this building, and I know the best people. I don't happen to know this consultant, but I've watched their work. It is excellent work. But you need to, as you go forward, to resist the tendency of certain property owners to not help you out. Now, I'll give you an example regarding the Airbus site. You have Glasgow on the north, you've got the Iron Horse Trail, you've got the tracks, you've got Strange Street. Two things that have been ignored with this focus on the large property owners, which large property owners and developers are important, but you have multiple taxpayers and multiple small property owners in the city who can actually help you achieve the good plans suggested by the consultant. So on that particular block, what's been overlooked is, I believe I read in the record, a councillor was interested in, pardon my voice, the missing mid-density housing. Talk to the property owners on the other side of Glasgow Street. It's a major artery with individual houses on it. Tell your planners, rezone that for 2 times floor space index housing. It's right opposite a huge employment center, the new tech center right next to Airbus. You've run into a problem with the region that you can't get the connection the plan called for from the Iron Horse Trail to go to the new hub station. Why? Because the region was talking to a railway, and guess what? The railway didn't return their call. Look at the other side of the tracks. You've got multiple property owners along the other side of the tracks, starting with McGillivray. You've then got a social housing project. You've got a whole network of owners that are there willing, if you work with them, to give you the trail on the other side of the tracks. The principle is the same. It's important to deal with your major property owners, and the consultant did a great job of that around Midtown. You cannot ignore Sun Life and all these other people who've got parking lots. They're major operators. But don't forget all your other property owners. They're peripheral to projects. They're taxpayers. Their land can be developed too.
Mr. Brisson,
direct your staff to take that look.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is a question of you from committee. Councillor Marsh.
I just want to thank you for coming in, Mr. Brisson, and for providing your comments. But I just want to ask, when you read that we are revising, did you read the updated copy of the Midtown report?
Yes, I've read the reports. I read specifically the documents that you responded to from the local planning consultant to
Exactly.
Airbus.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah. So from my reading, non-expert, we are not closing the door to new laneways and new streets within that property. And so I'm trying to understand your point, because the way I see it, it's just articulating that to anybody looking to potentially down the road purchase that property in another generation, for example, that the drawings do not scare them away to say, oh my goodness, there's going to be a road directly in the middle of my property, right? But the fact of the matter is that such a major square space will require laneways and roads, but not necessarily in those exact spots that have been put in the drawing. That's the way I understand it, and I'm just trying to understand if you have opposition to that.
Well, rather than speak in terms of opposition, I'll talk to you what I am for.
Mr. Brisson, if you can stand in front of the mic so it'll be easier for everyone to hear.
What I am for is a process, which is the way all planning, whether it's for this building, takes place, is that you prepare preliminary conceptual possibilities for the future.
Yes.
That includes drawing roads, lanes, possible housing projects to increase the density as the province is to everywhere.
Okay.
That doesn't mean any property owner has to execute it. But you have to prepare plans to show the roads. I'll give you an example.
That's okay. I don't need an example, and I'm aware that we are pressed for time. I just wanted to understand where you're coming from vis-a-vis that specific point, and I understand now. Yes, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brisson. That's all the questions for you. So, can I get a mover for the item? I got Councillor Fernandez has moved the item as recommended by staff. All those in favor? Opposed? And the item carries. And the next item is for Tall Buildings Guideline. And again, Mr. Brisson, my apologies. I looked at the next item and it's Michelle Tremblay, and I said Michelle first and then your name, so I didn't mean to call you Michelle. So my apologies. So the delegation is Michelle Tremblay. Cousin. Michelle, again, you have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Okay.
Yes, actually, you are right. You are right. I have no idea where I'm at today. My apologies. Michelle, actually, we should go to staff as rightly recommended by Councillor Gazzola. And Dana, if you can please bring forward the item. Fighting off a flu today, so I'm a little under the weather. If the committee and the delegation can bear with me a little bit today. Thank you. Go ahead. Please, if you can press, yeah, go ahead. You ready?
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. After 3 years of analysis, 3D modeling, and extensive public and stakeholder engagement, Adam and I are happy to be here today to present our tall building guidelines. In October 2016, Council approved the Statement of Expectations and asked staff to return prior to the end of 2017 with a complete set of guidelines. The Statement of Expectations was part of a more of a phased-in approach to guidelines, but also provided some level of certainty for the industry around what the city's expectations are for tall building design. The same one-year period allowed staff to attest approaches on tall building design on development approvals to ensure that our guidelines were both practical and effective. Extensive engagement with both the public and industry have occurred over the past few years in order to help shape these guidelines. In the spring of 2016, we held an open house for stakeholders and members of the public, which included a hosted interactive engagement session through Engage Kitchener. In 2017, we held an industry session which presented our first draft of the guidelines, which was followed up with one-on-one stakeholder interviews. Throughout the process, we engaged more than 400 people. We received more than 300 comments and had more than 20 meetings. Tall building guidelines are a permanent part of our urban environment, and they last for generations. Real density is created by having multiple high-density projects in close proximity to one another, and these projects have to fit relative to one another to really be successful. They have significant impacts on our quality of our urban environment. Tall buildings are complex, and there's no real one-size-fits-all approach. While we've looked and studied other cities' practices, we recognize that there is an importance in writing guidelines that are specific to Kitchener. What's being presented today is our unique Made in Kitchener approach. We've met with and listened to industry feedback over the past year and worked really hard to address their concerns. We've attempted to strike a balance between a lot of different considerations. We've looked at the local market and the changing market conditions. We do want a set of guidelines that best represent everyone's interests, and we believe we've struck that balance. So what we've developed are guidelines specifically for the Kitchener context to provide flexibility, but at the same time certainty in the submission process, scalability for any type of tall building, all while meeting the objectives for good tall building design.
Thank you, Dana. I'm just going to very quickly take you through the content of the guidelines. Tall buildings are those which are 9 stories and above, and that's consistent with the city's official plan. These guidelines are intended to be applied citywide, and that's made possible and practical by our scalable approach. So in the introduction of the guidelines, we speak to how the guidelines will be implemented. Tall buildings are very complex. These guidelines provide targets which work toward a best fit solution for a proposal, balancing all of the factors involved. Tall building design is not a one-size-fits-all. It's important to preserve for a diverse range of forms, tenures, sizes, and price ranges. The context-aware implementation that we're doing is how we're able to simultaneously meet the needs of the public, the development industry, and city staff. So within the built form section, our guidelines related to the ground floor and the building base design, speaking to the quality of the pedestrian experience, public safety, placemaking goals, things like that. Our tower design guidelines examine things like tower size, proportion, separation, overlook, placement, and relative height. Rather than prescribing hard numbers to one or two of these elements, as other cities have done, our scalable approach preserves for a diverse range of different design options on any given site. The built form section also includes guidelines related to top design. It's to help create a skyline that is dynamic and a valued part of Kitchener's identity. In our streets and open spaces section, we consider the elements which create a safe, comfortable, vibrant environment for Kitchener residents to live, work, play, and shop. In the compatibility section, we've created guidelines which speak to a tall building's impacts on its surroundings, including low-rise neighborhoods and heritage assets. The environment section, which is the last section, contains guidelines related to sustainability, as well as microclimatic impacts such as night sky standards, shadows, wind, and effects on local birds and wildlife. So just in conclusion, tall building guidelines have a role to play in reviewing development applications. They provide staff with a framework for reviewing tall building applications to achieve a best fit for the needs of all stakeholders, public and private. These guidelines need to be in place to help implement positive design direction on tall building applications going forward into the future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you both. Now again, if I can have Michelle Tremblay-Cousson, please. And once more, Michelle, you have 5 minutes to make your presentation. Councillor Ioannidis, I see you keyed in to staff. So if you want to key out, and then I'll remember you for when delegations are finished. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. My name is Michelle Tremblay-Cousson, and I'm here representing a group of Kitchener residents who agree that tall building guidelines are essential. As we all know, Kitchener is growing, and with the addition of the LRT, there will be a lot of changes within our community. It's great that guidelines are being considered and good urban form is being protected in the city's mandate. What I would better like to understand, and what is not clear in these guidelines, is who decides if a proposal fits the guidelines. Who determines what height fits into an existing neighborhood? The City Planning Department surveyed some 400 people to assist in arriving at the tall buildings guideline, yet some of the projects that are being proposed in the region completely ignore these guidelines. For example, the tall buildings being proposed at Cortland and Blockline are too high and are not the skyline we want to see in a residential community. Many long-term residents of the neighborhood will be negatively impacted, and therefore I want to ensure that these guidelines properly help shape how our community will grow and develop. Perhaps we can consider adding a commonly applied measure such as angular planes to the guidelines, as they assist in providing transition in scale from tall buildings down to lower scale areas. Doing so would limit shadow, loss of sky view, and overlook on neighboring properties. Angular plane, measured from the relative property lines, is typically used to provide transition in scale from growth areas or tall building developments down to lower scale areas such as residential neighborhoods. While there is a picture in section 2.22 depicting angular planes, there is no reference to specific measurements. Other cities have adopted a 45-degree angular plane as an appropriate measurement. The sun, shadow, and wind studies will be very important with any new proposed development. Using Wilson Place Towers near Fairview Park Mall as an example, you'll see that those towers created a massive wind tunnel, which has made it very unsafe for residents. It's important to ensure the erecting of a tower does not result in adverse wind effects at street level. The potential impact on privacy, daylight, sky view, sunlight, as well as shadows on public lands and neighboring properties is significant. It is important that we ensure tall buildings fit within the existing or planned context and provide appropriate transition in scale down to lower scale buildings, parks, and open spaces. These guidelines should limit the scale and height of tall buildings to appropriately frame the landscape while maintaining access to sunlight on the opposite side of the street at equinoxes. I don't want to make it sound as though I'm against or we're against growth and progress. In fact, we welcome it. But we believe it is important for any new development to be thoughtfully integrated with the diversity and character of the surrounding community. Tall buildings should not interrupt or impose on the character of an existing neighborhood, rather complement it. I believe there's a balance between progress and preserving our community, but we need to find it. Thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Michelle. Next up is Roger Suffling. Actually, if you can come back, Councillor Janeski just keyed in, and others are keying in now too. So, Councillor Janeski, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation, Michelle, and I acknowledge that you are in support of the design of the tall building report that is before us. But you also noted that the corner block line and Cortland was a concern because there's a proposal there, and the height of that proposal raises you some concern. Mm-hmm. For tall buildings, based on what you've read, what would be the maximum height allowable in your opinion?
So I'm not a city planner and I don't really have a perfect answer for that one. But what I would do is look at the surrounding community and neighborhood and what you have in place. So you have the Fallowfield apartments, which are 12 stories high. You have the Cortland, 1100 Cortland, which I believe is 8 stories high. We don't have anything in our area that's past 12 stories. You have to go to Fairview Park Mall or an area where you're talking about downtown core, or you're talking about, a shopping center. That's where these large, tall buildings currently exist and fit within the landscape of the community. So I would say anything 12 stories around that would actually fit in our neighborhood.
Okay, so I would gather then, so the Cortland block line is a transit stop part of the LRT system, mm-hmm. and so the planning is trying to, along with other transit stops, to have a higher density there with more, taller buildings. But you're saying that in those areas they should be limited to 10 to 15 stories more or less, and then the bigger concentrations, like being a downtown core, where they could be 40 stories or higher?
Yeah, and again, it's all relative. So if you actually look at the metric I was telling you, which is angular plane, and the drawing that they had, obviously you have tall buildings, and then you have that middle-sized buildings, and then you have neighborhood communities. I can't say there's a perfect answer to this, and I do believe we need to have densification around the LRT stops. I'm not arguing that. I guess I'm just not sure why that particular location and why such a great height. It would really truly impact that entire neighborhood.
Okay, and I don't know the answer to that question, but I guess it's as a result of an application in the area that's caused you to have a concern, I would guess. Is that correct?
Sure, and I think these guidelines are actually going to be helpful when people or residents actually want to go back and review a proposal that's in front of them, so that they can actually determine that these guidelines are being addressed and looked at with each proposal.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, no, I don't have any questions, Michelle. I just wanted to thank you for coming in. I understand you had to leave work early to come and attend. And I think you bring forward a lot of good points. You're not opposed to where we're going, but you want us to consider a number of issues, and it will have more relevance to your neighborhood coming down the road, and you will have additional opportunities there to come forward before council. So thank you again for coming today and for bringing your neighborhood. You're a real leader in the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, just quickly, Michelle, you talked about a 45% plane.
It's like a
degree. And you said you researched that some other cities did something like that. Could you give us the name?
Toronto is one, Burlington's another. I've just been reading through a whole bunch of plans to see. What I'm thinking, this plan is actually pretty great. What is missing are some actual figures or numbers. Like right now it's all conceptual. So what I was saying was we should be looking at some of those figures or numbers to potentially add to the plan.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming in and making your point.
Thank you.
Sean, actually, I had a question as well. So you're making a good point. You're raising, again, where is that aspect of sensitivity, right? When you have density, close proximity to a low-rise neighborhood. But then you have certain nodes as well, where density is preferred and recommended and encouraged. As an example, Fairview Mall, where you have buildings that exceed 15 stories, right beside, adjacent to very low-rise residential neighborhoods as well. But again, it does seems to fit. And again, this is planning policies that buildings where they were built 20, 30, 40 years ago. So where is that fine line where we do have infrastructure built in to support greater density? So example which you reference at proposed development at Block Line in Cortland, where you have a LRT station. Like as an example, where else would we do it then? If we're limited based on what you're saying, that you have to have the right separation of height from a low-rise neighborhood.
Yeah, and so again, I'd have to look at some other areas on the map, but what I'm thinking this proposal, specific to the one I'm talking about, is trying to address is densification by the LRT stop. But with 4 towers ranging up to 38 stories, you don't actually have to do all of the densification in one tiny plot. It's only 215,000 square feet, I believe. So what I'm saying is you could look at growth along the LRT stops, but it doesn't necessarily all have to happen in one particular location. And it seems like that's what is trying to be proposed right now, is throw everybody right there at that LRT stop in between Cortland Road, the LRT stop, and a train track. It's just an odd parcel of land that I think should remain as industrial property, not high density.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess that'll have to be filtered through the planning process for that proposal. Thank you very much for making your presentation and being here today. Again, next up is Roger Suffling, please. Roger, you have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I represent a group of 3 organizations who have written a letter to you, and that should be on your desks. We are Waterloo Region Nature, which is the regional naturalist organization. FLAP, which is Fatal Light Awareness Program. They have a particular interest in bird mortality. And Grand River Environmental Network, which has a general environmental focus in the region. What I'm going to talk about this afternoon is a specific aspect of the tall buildings guideline, which concerns bird mortality, and this has been a major conservation issue across the country. We are broadly in favour of the guidelines. We can see a lot of good things about them. We are pleased at the degree of consultation and the early consultation that took place. So there's a lot of good things going on here, and we don't want what we're saying to just sort of sound negative. These are just remaining concerns that we have. We like the proactive approach to tall buildings, and we appreciate the individual recommendations, like the urging people to have connections between tall buildings and parks and trails and so on. I want to set the context of what's going on here. There are 2 major causes of bird mortality in urban areas in Canada. And this mortality is significant, between 6 and 45 million birds per year. And in Toronto, between 1 and 10 million birds per year. And this isn't a local bird problem, it's a national problem. And there are two issues. One is high-level collisions high up on the buildings at night during the migration season because of excessive lighting. And the other one is transparent and reflective glass at ground level up to the tops of the trees, where birds, think they can fly somewhere and they're dead. Okay. Therefore, we have 6 remaining issues that we think should be addressed in the document. The first one is the obvious contradiction between the statement on pages 2 and 11, plea for a high percentage of transparency, which is kind of anti-bird, and then the plea for bird-friendly structures, which is pro-bird, and the two things are in collision here. We think there's a way around this, which is to use the wording a high percentage of visibility, because to have a building that is safe and welcoming is not necessarily to have a building that has giant sheets of cheap glass. We want to see the illustrations replaced or modified because the buildings shown are typical bird-killing buildings. Third, and this is really important, we want to discourage uplighting and aesthetic lighting on buildings, because this is really what causes mass mortality and results in ecological damage and a lot of heat within the community in terms of bad publicity. We would like to see the environmental section integrated with the rest of the document in terms of cross-referencing. And we would like to see the recommendations of the International Dark Skies Association included in these guidelines, because this isn't just a bird issue, it's to do with people's sleep patterns and comfort within the city, as well as our being able to see the sky above us. There's an increasing amount of glare developing in cities generally. We would like to see a recommendation for blinds to be added to windows to stop light leakage at night, and this is also energy saving. So, just to finish up here, we are willing to engage in a dialogue on other issues which are beyond the purview of the guidelines, namely the management issues, which will be ongoing and very important. And I leave you with one parting thought. As lighting gets cheaper, its use becomes more profligate, as you have cheap LEDs and so on. Do you want to have a marvelous city centre, or do you want to have a city centre based on Marvel Comics? Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are questions of you. Councillor Janeski, go ahead.
Thank you for coming in, Mr. Suffling, and making your presentation. Your package that you gave to council here, have you given this to staff and talked to staff about it?
Yes, it was sent to staff in City Hall. I'm not sure it got to the two actors here, the main people on staff who were dealing with this. It was put together over the weekend, and it has only just been delivered this afternoon.
Oh, okay. So you've had no communication with...
I can make sure they get copies.
Okay, I appreciate that. You were here back a month or two ago regarding the lighting of the smokestack, the former smokestack there back on Joseph Street, through the same concerns of lighting, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Your concern of these buildings and I guess the way they're built and how much light these buildings emanate when they're lit up at night, and I guess there's going to be a lot of metal and glass basically, and that's the concern that you have. Notwithstanding this proposal, of all the existing buildings we have right here in Kitchener and Waterloo and Cambridge, the ones that are 8, 10, 12 stories, and some of them a little higher, have you experienced, or from your research, a problem with birds hitting the existing buildings right now?
Oh yeah. This is kind of ironic. If you go down to the architecture school in Cambridge, which is a refurbished building, and it's, I don't know how many stories it is, probably 6. 3? Okay. There's a row of windows along the ground floor, nice big picture windows, and they reflect from the shrubbery immediately opposite, just a few feet away. You can go down there most weeks and find dead birds.
So what you're telling me is really it's not the height of the building, it's the way the building's designed with lighting, because that's only a 3-story building.
No, they're two separate issues. One is daytime strikes where birds see reflections as reality and they fly into the window, okay? Or they try to fly through an opening that appears to be a flyway through but is actually two glass facades. The second issue is during the migration period, at night, when tall structures, and the taller they are, the more it's a problem, tall structures are lit, especially from the bottom upwards. The typical scenario would be a May night, a late April night, foggy or low cloudy conditions, and a south wind, and you can have 1,500 birds dead at the bottom of a structure if it's lit from below with uplighting,
Right.
and it's tall.
If we didn't have that lighting, and we didn't have any glass in those tall buildings, would we have a problem with birds?
Occasionally, yes, but not much.
So it really comes down to the architecture of the building and how much brick there is versus how much glass there is and how much,
Yeah, it's a design issue, and it's very much an economics issue in the sense that, proponents, developers will try to cut costs, and glass is cheap.
Yeah, okay. So really the concern is not the height of the building, it's the structure and the architecture in terms of glass. I mean, you can have 3-story buildings, you give me an example,
Yeah.
and there you have a problem.
Yeah, the devil is in the details. We're not asking for buildings to be different heights, different design, whatever. They can be tall. But let's make sure that they're not lit unnecessarily. Just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. And that was why my reference to Marvel Comics. I'm not sure we want that kind of city anyway. And the other situation is the behaviour within the building. If the lighting is at the wrong time of year, in the wrong way, then you're going to get major problems. And that's why I made the reference to management as one goes forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor Ivanovic, there's more.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming in and sharing some of your perspectives.
Sir, there's questions of you from the mayor. Yes.
Thanks for coming in and for sharing some of your perspectives with us. In particular, I noted toward the end of your letter, you indicated that as a group of organizations, you'd be interested in helping raise awareness about dark sky and bird strike issues amongst developers, building managers, and the general public. Are there some best practices that you're aware of from other cities in terms of how this is done and work that we could potentially undertake?
In terms of management, I'm not sure that anybody's very, very far forward. Probably the people at FLAP could give details if there are, but most of the emphasis has been on design. I'm very much aware that, a lot will depend on the superintendent, on the tenants of a building, on the commercial operators in the building, their goodwill and their understanding. They're not going to understand these issues, and they're not all bird watchers, They're not going to understand these issues unless somebody brings them to their attention in a way that they can respond to, in a practical way.
Now, is this, like some of the concerns, particularly around the bird death, is this something that typically is experienced at all tall buildings? Because I think, for example, our building here is 10 stories high. Mm-hmm. And, over its last 25 years lifespan, I'm not aware of significant numbers of bird deaths, as an example.
No, you don't have a lot of tall vegetation right up against reflective windows.
Okay.
You have a lot of surfaces out in the square here where the skating rink is with, broken up window surfaces, and those are generally not a problem.
So the concern would be if a tall building was, for example, right next to Victoria Park, and then you'd have those reflections and potentially have some of the issues you're talking about.
No, the concern would be from tree height down to ground level with reflective surfaces there, because that's where the birds are, that's their habitat during the day. And the other concern would be at night, during the migration season with lighting and birds getting confused and smacking into buildings in large numbers. So it's two different issues.
Okay. But again, I guess my point is that we haven't had a lot of that situation here. And is it because of the fact that, we're doing, I mean, I know that, for example, we turn off our lights at 6 o'clock, and they, they get turned on, but they're automatically turned off on 2-hour cycles and so on, partially to save energy, admittedly. But you're saying those kinds of practices would positively impact the situation you're talking about?
Oh yeah, if you can pull the blinds down. If the cleaners would use another system other than leaving the lights on until they've cleaned a room and then turning them off, so that their mates know what's been done and what hasn't. You could put a tag on a door, There's ways of tackling this that don't cause a lot of expense or inconvenience.
Okay, thank you.
There are questions from Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Singh. You mentioned that it's possible for 1,500 birds to lose their lives in one night.
Yep.
Where has this happened?
Toronto.
And what's the
power stations, lighthouses.
Yeah, but those are cities near large bodies of water. So there's differences in bird population. So would that be normal? I mean, I would expect that would be something that would be covered by the media if there was that many birds killed in one night.
Well, it has been covered extensively for Toronto. We're all on a flyway, on the eastern flyway, with migrants going north. So it's not a local problem. It's a problem with the cities are like a series of obstacles, lethal obstacles in the way of bird migration. So we're not going to move away, and we're not going to stop building cities, but we should wise up on how to do it.
Okay.
We need to be smarter.
Okay. I admire your passion for this. I just question some of the statistics, that's all.
Well, I'm an ecologist with nearly 50 years of experience professionally. I read the scientific literature. There are good papers and there are bad papers. There's a huge mass of good papers on this science. If you send me an email, I'll be happy to send you summaries of some of them. If you go to Michael Messier at Fatal Light Awareness Program, he can give you the statistics and the origins of the statistics, where they're coming from and who's collecting them. It's well established and it's pretty devastating.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
Councillor, I noticed you had keyed in to ask questions of staff. Do you want to key back in, if you still have them? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Singh. I guess my question is basically, how long have we been working on this project for?
Through the chair, we've been working on this project since 2014 when council asked staff to prepare tall building guidelines. In that time, we've done extensive engagement, 3D modeling, study and analysis, as well as the release of a statement of expectations prior to coming forward tonight with the full document.
Okay. And how many public meetings have we had in regards to this?
Through the chair, we had, in 2016, we had an open house and presentation, and then that was followed up through an Engage Kitchener survey that was public that ran for a few months.
Okay, and my other question is, I remember, I think I saw the slide, but you had the amount of how many comments that were received, or how many folks have, it was 300?
Yeah, approximately, or more.
And do you have the it went by so quick. Do you have the representation of what that slide was? Was it mainly residents? Was it mainly educational? Was it development world?
Yeah, the infographic that's on the slide, if we can go back to that, has the breakdown. At the first meeting in 2016, the public open house on the red tower on the far left, We had 196 comments and 80 people in attendance. The Engage Kitchener survey had 241 people that participated and 29 comments that were received. In 2017, we had our industry engagement, so we had our industry stakeholder, which we had 99 comments, 13 one-on-one interviews with the industry members, and 34 people attended that meeting. We also had many internal meetings with city staff and council, and we had approximately 36 people engaged internally, as well as we've provided all this information to the neighborhood associations.
Okay, and that is a great graph, by the way. I like that one.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that's excellent. That's what I wanted to hear. Chair, when the time's ready, appropriate, I'm willing to move the recommendation.
Sure, I'll come back to you. Councillor Marsh?
Just a question or two of staff. So, first of all, what a beautiful document. Well done. I know this has been highly anticipated by many members of the community and the planning community as well. So I'm glad to see this before us today. One of the delegates mentioned the concept of the angular plane, which I know you're really quite highly familiar with. Is it not in the Planning Act that 45-degree angular plane is required for? No? So can you tell us about, just provide some detail about your considerations specifically around angular plane, as well as is the equinox time frame a consideration in any of our guidelines?
Through Mr. Chair, angular plane is something that we studied extensively as we studied every aspect of tall building design throughout the last couple of years. We believe that we've achieved the positive effects that angular plane can achieve through other means, including separation, overlook, tower placement, tower orientation. These are a more complex set of relationships that more fully guarantee good design relative to what we would do if we implemented angular plane. Angular plane runs the very real and common risk of pushing all of a building massing to one side of a site, resulting in very, very long, very, very tall buildings, because that's when it's cleared that angular plane. Because it's such a strict number being applied in any potential context, it can have a lot of unwanted effects as well. So that's why we speak through the way that we intend to implement the guidelines and through the built form elements that we are proposing as being important to these relationships. Flexibility, scalability, things that change relative to one another instead of a single element that has to be met. Oh, and sorry, for the equinox, we certainly look at sun shadow studies for every tall building development. We ensure a certain standard of access to sunlight. We work with individual applications to determine exactly what that needs to be in every individual context, but sun and shadow analysis is a very important part of our process.
Okay, thank you very much. And can you speak to how the city will be able to hold new developments that come forward accountable to the tall buildings guideline, or to what degree we can?
Through the chair, once these are approved, staff are excited to be able to implement these through the site plan process and through the development application process. Once an application comes in, we'll be able to work with applicants to achieve the intent and the spirit of these guidelines. As you know, there's many guidelines and there's many ways to look at the application. This is a tool for staff to review a proposal against. It's also would provide some certainty for the industry as to what the city expects for tall building guidelines. As Michelle had mentioned earlier, it's a tool for the public to look at a development application and review it, and so that everyone has an idea of what the city's expectations are for good design.
Wonderful, thank you.
Councillor Fernandez, before you start, if you want to both key in your mics, it might be easier than swapping back and forth. Adam, okay, go ahead, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. So as I was reviewing your documentation, and I'm trying to decide which one to look at best, but I think this is the updated version, the one that went with the report. So my questions are originating from that report. So when I say page 6 of 18, that's the one that you had the slide that was on, you just took it off before you put the engagement on. Is this picture that I see here something that we're looking at attaining in our city?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is dependent on context. It gives a general idea of the type of transition and compatibility that a sort of a very intense node would have.
Because that's really intense. I mean,
it is.
I don't know how we would avoid shadowing. I don't know how we would avoid wind tunneling, snow. But that's a comment, so you could take that into consideration, please. Page 8 of 18. It says, tall buildings that are part of a multiple tower development should do everything possible to meet their overlook target on site. So the word everything possible leaves it still pretty open-ended, in my opinion. I'd like to know, I guess, what kind of rationale would we see that would be acceptable? Where somebody would say, a developer, a builder would say, well, I've done everything possible, but, I still have to have this. So, where would we give that?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. There are circumstances in which a site shape does not allow overlook to be met according to the letter of the law within the guidelines. In those cases, it might be possible to exceed separation distance, for example, and by exceeding separation distance by a certain amount, that lessens the concerns of overlook because it creates more space between the buildings, people are farther apart for privacy concerns, the shadows aren't as impactful, things like that. So we wanted to just make sure that there were ways to work with a potential site, and there certainly would be circumstances where two towers wouldn't be appropriate next to each other because they couldn't achieve the overall intent of the guidelines. But there is room to move the elements around in order to achieve good design.
Okay. On page 9 of 18, you show all the different ways of separation, overlook, relatively height, orientation. When we met in my office, and you were pretty excited about that you were able to achieve, I believe, relative height and orientation on a development that's coming forward. So that, and with no disrespect to the Drullo buildings on Fallowfield, that we would not see something like that again. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Because, I mean, I've had experiences we discussed with the Drullo buildings on Wilson, which are absolutely unacceptable, in my opinion, for safety for residents coming out of those buildings, and many, many seniors live in those buildings. So I hope we don't see that again. When I look at page 10-18, that's a picture of the City Hall plus the City Center building. And I know that this is all about buildings that are over 8 stories high. What is too high, in your opinion? Have we set that height? And if we haven't, why haven't we?
Through the chair, that's very context specific, and these guidelines aren't looking at setting a height anywhere in the city. Official plan designations and zoning are another tool, and are the combination thereof that set the height and density. These guidelines are something that will apply through site plan control to look at how we can make the tall buildings that either are approved or that are previously zoned or designated for tall buildings, that they best fit with the compatibility of the neighborhood.
So when will this guideline come in effect? After council?
Through the chair, this guideline will be in effect once it's approved by council, but it will apply to all building proposals that are 9 stories and above.
Okay. I got a couple more. I'm going to run out of time. On page 14 of 18, you show two little houses and a building in behind. Is this where we're talking about that 45% plane? Is that what we're seeing here? I mean, the building in behind, I think, is an example of Trio on Belmont. Is that right? This is an actual picture. Is there enough separation for both the people in the apartment building, but also the people in their backyards to have privacy here?
So, through Mr. Chair, This photo is more of an example of what the visual impact of a tall building can be on neighborhoods surrounding it. Tall buildings often have greater visual impacts than one expects when one's looking at a site plan, for example. In this case, a 45 angular plane would be achieved absolutely effortlessly many hundreds of meters before we even get to this building.
Okay, all right. I will key back in then.
Yes, please. Thank you. Councillor Janeski.
Well, continuing on with the questioning of Councillor Fernandez on the height, I was going to test you, but you sort of answered the question in terms of, is there a maximum? And I didn't see anything in the report, but on the other hand, this report is an urban design manual as opposed to a zoning bylaw. So there's two different animals we're talking about, although they will complement each other in terms of the proposed application, but they're two separate documents, right? So really, we could have a 10-story building, a 20-story building, 40-story building, even a 60-story building. Because there's no limit. It all depends on the size of the property, distance separations, and as you pointed out, separation, orientation, overlook, all those factors we key in. The bigger the property you have, the better opportunity you have to go up. So we don't have to worry about that because we don't have huge properties in Kitchener, although there are some that are reasonable. So the zoning bylaw will address the floor space ratio, the height, setbacks, and all that stuff, which is fine. On page 6 of your report, you've got at the bottom half a very beautiful picture of half a dozen buildings, nicely situated, oriented, separated, and all those nice little words, and they look great. And this is just a proposal. There's no example of a thing, right? But there's a lot of glass there. And based on Mr. Suffling's presentation on this is an architect's sort of rendition. I think that looks great. It looks beautiful. But will it become a bird issue? You know, because when you look at all the greenery at the bottom, maybe that's going to be a problem. But then again, maybe are the birds hitting the 3rd floor or are they hitting the 33rd floor and dying? You know, that's the thing that we have to address. And again, urban design or the architecture is not part of urban design because that's an architect's license to interpret what he feels would be great in some of the buildings. And that's a wonderful way of handling it. So it's not an issue. Michelle, who made a presentation also on this proposal, talked about the concern on Blockline and Cortland. Will the application that's there be under consideration for the tall buildings urban design? But you also stated that this will come into effect once council approves it. Will it go retroactive to applications that have been already filed, or is this for new applications that are coming in after it's approved by council?
Through the chair, I'll do my best to answer those questions, and there's a lot. These guidelines, once they are approved, will apply to applications that are not currently in for site plan. So as Michelle had discussed, a proposed application for Blockline Cortland, that is in the very early stages of an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment application. If these are approved tonight, they will apply to that site when it comes in for site plan approval. Staff are working with the applicant early on in the official plan, looking at a land use designation and zoning for that site. That will then come back to council for a decision on the land use designation. And once that land use designation is in place and council has determined that a tall building is appropriate, those guidelines will apply through the site plan phase.
Okay. So the key words you mentioned were site plan applications. Official plans, zone changes that are in the works, that's fine. They'll get processed and considered by council. But once the site plan application timing kicks in, and if this is in place, then you got to follow it.
Through the chair, that's correct. We will be working through the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications to look at tower form and separation and podium height and some of those elements that that may be codified in the zoning regulations as an official plan amendment or zoning bylaw amendment application comes through. So there are parts of the building that may be that will be looked at in advance in relation to the guidelines. However, some of the details of orientation and siting and base level and streetscape and microclimatic impacts will be dealt with through site plan control.
Perfect. Right on zero. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arlington, again, if we all want to refrain from very long pre-qualifying question as well as comments, we're really behind schedule right now, almost an hour and a half. So, not saying you do, I'm just saying for all of us, including myself. Councillor Arlington.
You just want questions?
That's fine.
I figured that's what you were trying to say, but my first question on page 2-3 of your introductory report, CSD 17097, there's a paragraph there that says, what is a tall building and where will the guidelines apply? Excuse my ignorance on planning, but I've often wondered, because this is at the crux of what a building looks like and what it ends up looking like, who determines, can you tell me who determines among our staff what is high design and architecture in relation to any tall building? Do you guys determine that?
Through the chair, I think this document will provide a framework for what is good tall building design based on the input and the principles we receive from the public, based on the engagement we receive from the stakeholder, and based on the study and analysis we've done over the past few years. We feel that this guideline for Kitchener will act as a guiding document for what represents good tall building design.
And probably in this chamber right at the moment, there are some very impressive architects, planners, designers. They would come up with different opinions from our staff planners occasionally. What do you do then in relation to how a building looks?
Through the chair, through the process, through the planning process, we do have different opinions, and that's something that we work out. We do have this set of guidelines that looks at design principles, such as activated streetscape or mitigating microclimatic impacts. The design of a building, for sure, is somewhat subjective around different architectural professionals. However, the design principles that are outlined in this document are very clear, and I think that those are something that many of us in the planning and design profession can agree upon.
So again, as staff are saying, design attributes could be subjective as said, but again, the guidelines provide a baseline.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just concerned, probably paralleling Mr. Brisson's comment on roads as to these design standards. I just want to be confident that you don't immediately cave in to the experts who are sitting before you. I see, by the way, you're nodding that you don't, or I hope you don't. By the way, I saw these two staff people at work in a site plan discussion a week ago, and I was very impressed with the room full of comment. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I just have one. It's more of a general question, and it's with respect to the definition, I'll call it the definition of guidelines that you have on page 2, where it says the guidelines are flexible and do not arbitrarily limit building types and building typologies. Is that the same principle that we use for all guidelines within the planning realm of things? So our urban design guidelines, not our tall. So this might not be specifically for the both of you, but with respect to urban design guidelines, are they all meant to be flexible?
Through the chair, guidelines are inherently somewhat flexible as urban design is very complex and there's a lot of things to consider. What was meant by that statement is that many other municipalities across Ontario and across Canada have a very rigid approach to tall building design. It's a fixed separation distance or a maximum floor plate size, where here in Kitchener we've looked at alternative solutions. So we've looked at building height and the tower floor plate to determine what that separation would be and what a tall building could look like. So our approach very much allows for different types of built form, larger buildings, smaller buildings, taller buildings, wider buildings that allow for a variety of housing types, forms, tenures, and sizes as well.
I can appreciate it within the context of this tall building guidelines. I guess what I'm trying to make sure doesn't happen again is that guidelines become the be-all and the end-all. Like there isn't that flexibility within it. I'm seeing some of that. So I'm trying to make sure this doesn't happen again with this guideline where if you're presented with something that's different or outside the realm, that it at least is looked at and not necessarily just, well, it's not part of our guidelines. So I want to make sure this document has that flexibility, unlike what is appearing in some of our other guideline documents.
So through you, Mr. Chair, just to respond to that very quickly, our working with the guidelines section on page 1 of the guidelines was added specifically to address that very specific thing. We understand that tall buildings are very complex and that there is no one way to do it. And so we wanted to make sure we provided language up front that set our expectations for good design through all of the consideration of these elements, but not through necessarily one rigid piece or another rigid piece.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. I appreciate the reason we're here, because I remember back in 2014 when we had a tall building going up on Victoria Street, and there were questions of shading and all that, and we had no idea. So I just want to emphasize and ask you that these are guidelines. They're not chiseled in stone. They're like our design guidelines, and I take it that leaves room for discussion with staff when these things arise. So I just that you'll confirm that. One simple question, and you may have dealt with it. What about fire coverage on tall buildings? Do you deal with that here? Like how high can our fire department work with?
Through the chair, I will confirm that they are guidelines. As for the extent to which fire services can deal with buildings, I'm not 100% sure if there's a maximum or a limit on that.
That's largely a building code concern?
Yeah, the fire services comments on all development applications that come in to city staff. So, I mean, if there was a concern regarding height or the ability to put out a fire, I'm sure that would be brought forward at the time of an application.
Have they had an opportunity to discuss your plans at this point?
Through the chair, they were circulated a draft of the document.
And you've not heard any comments on it?
Yeah, they had no issue.
Okay, thank you.
And again, Councillor Gazzola, we're not talking through these guidelines aspect of height. They're, again, coming back to general guidelines of what can fit and is conducive to good design and build. Mayor Bavanovic.
Comment.
Comment, okay, if you can ring back in. Councillor Fernandez.
Yes. I just wanted to point out that on page 11 of 18, one of the statements here is the back of house areas should be lit, and use of lighting and landscaping to maximize safety and comfort. I'm wondering if that speaks to some of the concerns that Mr. Suffling had with regards to FLAP. And should those two statements maybe be slightly modified to speak to the concerns that he brought forward today?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are a lot of competing elements with some of these things. Public safety is absolutely a priority for us. Having streets and pedestrian walkways that are lit and accessible, that don't feature entrapment areas, that's a vital concern to us. At the same time, we do have guidelines in this document that do speak to night sky and to bird collisions. Those are on page 17 and 18 respectively. It's really more about working through an individual proposal to ensure that we can achieve both.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Dana, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that. Through the chair, we have lighting standards in Part C of our urban design manual that look at downlighting and directing lighting to provide public safety, but to avoid uplighting into the sky that would affect the dark sky and the bird migration patterns.
Okay, thank you. And one other comment on page 18 and 18, where we talk about the sun shadow analysis and wind study, and I think it's really critical that in this climate, in a Canadian climate where many people are starting to suffer from the whole sun deprivation disorder, that when we're looking at these building designs, we make sure that we have a high expectation on this. I think that's really important. The last thing we want to do is see people coming out of these buildings who have been deprived of the sunlight and the light that we all sort of require to make us happy. So, thank you.
Take that as your comment as well?
Sure.
Okay. Councillor Ioannidis, comment or question? Yeah. Okay, Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chair Singh. When this was proposed, I really had some major concerns, and I'm glad you turned me around, and the thoughtfulness and the depth of engagement that you guys went through is greatly appreciated, and I'm glad we took the time to go through things over, because as what I recall, the appetite at the time was let's get this done right away, and that was my big concern. I didn't want to rush into things and then not get this right. So I think you've done a fabulous job, and I do appreciate the flexibility that's within these guidelines, but more importantly, I appreciate the fact that you're able to preserve the economic impact that this would have caused, as well as the environmental impact, and then as also the social impact. So I think you guys did a fabulous job. Thank you.
Mayor Bevenovic.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I too just want to thank staff for all of the work that's been done over the last couple of years on this project. I think it has been very comprehensive, well thought out. Many of the issues, if not all of the issues, have been covered off. It is a balancing act, right? I mean, you want to see the presence of some tall buildings and so on in an urban environment, but at the same time, it's absolutely integral that they be done in a way that is respectful of existing neighborhoods, and also that it's done in a way that that ensures a good pedestrian comfort factor. And it's very different to build high rises when you're on a 2-lane road structure versus when you're on a 4 or 6-lane road structure, and what that means for pedestrians and so on. And I think a lot of these issues, coupled with our zoning or bylaw and our OP, have ensured that all of this gets covered off going forward. I think there are some good suggestions around how we can do some education of the development industry, whether it's on things like night lighting and bird migratory patterns and so on, and how that potentially is impacted by the work that we do. And as this evolves in the coming months and years, perhaps that's something we can look at providing some of those sort of information sheets and making them available as a way to support development going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, back in the stakeholder feedback, the page just ahead of stakeholder feedback in Part B, Design for Tall Buildings, page numbers are bewildering in the document I have. But I just wanted to say I strongly support staff's arguments against the use of suggested they call it softening of the language that softens these guidelines. I call them waffle words to dilute this kind of process. And I would strongly encourage you not to go that route, despite the fact several councillors would like you to go that route. I think there's a difference between flexibility and total cave-in. I even have trouble with the word guidelines most of the time because I don't want your high standards to be threatened by this kind of language and use of these words. So I hope you will maintain your standards and watch out for that type of words. You're aware of them, and stay with your highest standards. Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I want to start by thanking staff. I think oftentimes we comment when we have to go external for this sort of work, and I'm happy to see that this work was all internal, and I think it was appropriately handled by a planner and an architect. I think they did a great job in terms of engagement and the guidelines before us. I'll be happy to support the recommendation. I think it does walk that line between seeing the sort of structures that the high quality sort of buildings that we want to see in our city in the future, but without unnecessarily discouraging developers from wanting to build here. Because as we're all aware, towers are the most sustainable form of development, whether you're talking about the environmental impacts or the fiscal ones in terms of infrastructure. So I think I would just say great job, and I think as a result our city's going to be much better in the future.
Councillor Janetsky.
Well, I see that we have another exemplary report here again from our wonderful department of the planning staff, who have done again an amazing job of putting it together and bringing us some guidelines and design that is sort of needed. I remember back in my days when we just sort of built it, we didn't consider it as strongly, and it wasn't an issue at the time. Other factors were important, but this, as we come to try to make buildings look good and areas around the buildings look amenable, livable, this document certainly goes a long way to do it. I definitely will be supporting it, and once again, congratulations to staff and all of you to put it together. Another fantastic report.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Singh. I also want to compliment you on a real wonderful project. I think, in the meetings that we've had discussing this, and there's been so much engagement, and thank you for keeping council informed along the way, but this really, I think, allows for some great flexibility, a variety of buildings. I think it's going to inspire creativity, some very distinctive and great buildings. I think we've got a great development community here, and I think they're very capable of doing great things, and I think something like this and allowing them to work together with you is going to provide us with some really great buildings. And I love the fact too that you're really putting a good focus on the streetscape, so things will be alive and vibrant at street level, and it's great work, and I commend you highly on it.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'll be very quick and brief. Try to be. I too want to thank staff. I think they've done an excellent job. I know where we were a few years ago. We didn't really know, weren't sure which way we should turn, and they've done a good job with dealing with the public, but also have spent time with all of council and explaining where they're going. And just people that have concerns about whether things will soften in the future. Until next Monday night, these are staff's designs, but after that, the buck stops with council, and the problems that belong with council, and it's up to council then to defend them in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the last comment, so I'll quickly make mine. And think many members of committee and council have, complimented staff on great work. It's this body of work, and I know it was a long time coming with a tremendous amount of consultation with the stakeholders, with the public, and seeing best practices. And it's tremendously hard to be all things to all people. But this report seems to satisfy all sides, and that's a quite of a task. And compliment goes to the planning staff, and of course to you, Adam, and to you both actually. That you guys have, done a spectacular job with consulting council leading up to this report. And the only other thing I would say is a couple of comments were made aspect of flexibility or looking at it, setting high standards or, setting a exception to, the guidelines or word guidelines. I think we are not here to set in stone of what we expect. There is no question we are going to intensify as a city. It's not if, absolutely, it's when, and that when is coming very quickly. So we do have to have general guidelines that ensures that our city develops appropriately. It intensifies in accordance to compatibility to neighborhoods that are just on the outlining that are low-rise, existing neighborhoods. But at the same time, we can't shortfall our capacity to intensify in our urban core, in our nodes, where density is required to ensure that we build the right way instead of building outward. And the guidelines that are outlined in this report ensure that we set a certain recommendation and expectation from a building community that before they even bring forward an application, they know where the expectation is. And that's where sometimes the frustration from the development community ends up being that they don't know what's required of them. Well, that's not in question now. They know exactly what's expected, and they can better work with their planning staff in getting to that right product that meets the business case, that can be easily marketed, but at the same time that will stay true to the test of time, because these buildings will be here for the next 50 to 100 years, and they will be reflective of who we are as a community. But this document ensures that we will be an amazing community. So thank you to the both of you. You have done a fantastic job. The item has already been moved by Councillor Ioannidis. I think recorded vote was okay. Sure. Recorded vote. And that was unanimous. And as I said, I'm fighting off a flu. Adam and Dana, I totally went blank. Looking at you, I'm like, what's the name? Of course I know, it's Dana. I know I mentioned Adam. I want to make sure that I acknowledge you as well, that you guys both together have done a fantastic job. So thank you. Just for the committee and those in the audience, we are quite behind schedule. I'd say close to an hour and a half, if not more so now. The next item alone is scheduled for an hour as it's outlined in the report. It could end up taking longer. So my recommendation would be that we try to stay on time. I will also declare a conflict on the next item, which is the parts review for Rockaway, as my parents own property in the defined the boundary of that study. So I will recuse myself in the discussion and pass it on to Councillor Ioannidis. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you, everyone. We will now move on to Item number 3, dealing with planning around rapid transit station areas, Parts Rockway. I do want to make note to committee that there's a couple letters there was a letter circulated by GSP Group with regards to the Rockway plan, as well as staff have put forward a revised recommendation that was handed out to committee. So with that, we do have a staff presentation, a 10-minute presentation. I'm not sure. I think, is Ms. Malone, are you doing the presentation? I'll click on both.
Mr. Chair, I believe I had Melanie Hare of Urban Strategies listed on the agenda, but instead Craig Lametti is here from Urban Strategies to do the presentation.
Okay, can you repeat that? I couldn't.
Yeah, sure. I believe Melanie Hare is listed on the agenda as doing the presentation. There has been a change. It'll be Mr. Craig Lametti from Urban Strategies.
Go ahead.
Great.
Thank you
very much. Well, just very happy to be here tonight. Really happy to present this. I think particularly given how close everything is to being achieved as it relates to the LRT. It's great to see all the infrastructure in place and really excited to see it come forward. I'll be pretty quick here because I understand where we are with the time. Obviously, we're very close, and this is a tremendous opportunity. And I think everyone's quite aware that the LRT, particularly in Kitchener's context, creates a real opportunity to improve mobility, support placemaking, and really, I think, importantly, develop a series of very vibrant communities with a mix of uses along the corridor. I think to their credit, recognizing this tremendous opportunity, staff here have really been engaged over the last number of years in trying to understand what that opportunity means and do the best to plan for it. We're here tonight to present the Rockway Station Area Plan. It really comes a part of the third phase of the Planning Around Rapid Transit Stations process, known as PARTS, which commenced earlier on with a Phase 1 sort of background report and study, a series of Phase 2 initiatives that looked at sort of corridor-wide strategies, and now in Phase 3 we're here looking at the specifics of these station areas. And this falls on the heels of the Parts Central Plan and the Parts Midtown Plan, which I think you saw about 6 weeks to a month ago. So just a little bit of background on the Rockway Station area. This is one of the largest station areas that I think was studied because it actually encapsulates two stations, Borden and Mill. And I think one of the important things to sort of realize about this station area is it's got a tremendous mix of living and working on the station area, and that was a really defining characteristics. It's a very large study area, about 210 hectares. But despite that, it actually has a relatively low population density, so about 46 people and jobs per hectare. And we know that that's a bit low for someplace with this level of transit access. Speaking of transit access, it's projected to grow by about 5 times over the next 15 years. So that's a pretty remarkable thing to consider, and was certainly taken into consideration in these plans. Now, the plans weren't certainly not developed in isolation. They went through an extensive consultation process, which had included a first PIC, which was really engaging the community around some of the key issues and opportunities related to this study area. We went back to them following that to make sure, did we get it right? Are we understanding those issues? And it also put forward a series of higher level options, which we sought their sort of input and feedback on. Based on that, we then went away and then came forward and held a series of held a stakeholder workshop and evening open house. And that was a real opportunity for us to engage the kind of key stakeholders on the development of the station area plan. You can see in front of you here a picture of the model that was developed with those stakeholders during that session. And then a lot of those ideas were carried right forward and embedded within the plans. And then we came back in May of this year with the draft plans for review and comment. So lots of great engagement, and I really like to think that these plans were shaped by that great engagement that we got. As you can imagine, we heard lots of things as it relates to this station area. So everything from the fact that remnant industries are creating sort of large blocks that are difficult for pedestrians, to the importance of preserving that live-work environment, or thinking about connections such as to the Odd, which may be away from the station, but are actually really important to be connecting by the LRT. We also heard, a number of great opportunities with respect to maintaining that mix of live-work, using some of the larger redevelopment sites as opportunities to increase the grain of the street network, support mobility, add a new mix of uses, and very importantly, a diversity of housing types. So it's a bit of a long vision, so I've broken it up here, but I think that reflects, again, the size of the site and the sort of input that we received. And so some of the key elements of the vision here are about creating a walkable urban village, one with a distinct character and sense of place, and one that also balances that history of industry that exists in the area. There was a real sense that we didn't want to sort of wipe the slate clean and start all over again. Strategies to, I think this goes part and parcel with that, maintaining and attracting new employment seem as very critical here. And the redevelopment of former industrial sites, while it's seen as an opportunity to bring new people and uses, they should also look at opportunities to maintain and grow that employment there so that it can keep that live-work balance. At the same time, you have these larger industrial sites that are going to go through a period of redevelopment. And when that happens, there creates a real opportunity to think about how that development can help to stitch together the various parts of the station area, add new streets, provide greater sense of amenity in terms of new open spaces, and really make sure that we get a broad mix of housing types so that you can actually cater to people at all stages of their life, whether they be young or old, and at all sort of levels of income. A key part of this, and I think one of the distinguishing features about the Rockaway Station area, was the fact that Shoemaker Creek and Schneider Creek corridors run right through the middle of this, and it posed certainly some challenges, but I think also a tremendous opportunity, and that's captured here in the vision, as an opportunity for ecological restoration of those corridors, and use that restoration to really create a signature central open space that obviously provides amenity, but also creates a setting for that higher density development. And then I think this last point, again, was just to re-emphasize the importance of creating and preserving that live-work environment, was that you have new houses and amenities that create an attractive place to live, but also at the same time continue to attract new employment opportunities by creating an attractive place to work. So the key directions and strategies within the station area plan, I think, are really divided under three key themes: built form and land use, mobility, and public realm. And I won't get into all the specifics of these, but I think it's fair to say the built form and land use certainly contain some of the most number of strategies. And just to give you a flavor of the types of things that are captured within the plan, everything from preserving the character of existing established neighborhoods to reinforcing King Street as an important gateway to the downtown of your community, facilitating the reurbanization of some of the larger sites, and creating focus areas of development around the various station areas. This is just a bit of an example of one of those and some of the details that are carried forward in the plan. And this is key direction number 8, which is facilitating the reurbanization of the former Schneider site. And I think I want to point out a couple things here. One is that the plans considered a range of building types, so we have everything from higher density, tall, high-rise development internal to the site to mid-rise development and even 2- and 3-story development that integrates alongside stable neighborhoods. So it really was about providing that full mix of housing typologies on the site. The development is structured around a new open space that actually helps to extend the Shoemaker Creek corridor and preserve for its ecological restoration over time, and includes a mix of employment uses, some of which are making use of some of the existing buildings on site. Key directions related to directions and strategies related to mobility were really about taking what is an area designed for the large part employment uses with very large blocks, and finding ways to break those down over time to create a more fine-grained street and block network. The Iron Horse Trail is obviously a tremendous asset here, and thinking about strategies to extend that network over time were also included in the mobility section. There's a section on Kent Avenue and turning that into a complete street as an important connector between the Borden Station and Schneider site, and obviously looking at opportunities to improve pedestrian and cycling conditions throughout the station area. Focusing in on one of these sections, this is the one looking at extending the Iron Horse Trail network. And you can really, I hope, see here the approach was to take that Iron Horse Trail and look for ways to kind of extend it out so it sort of is woven throughout the station area. This includes using Kent as a strong east-west connection, looking for opportunities for new bike connections along the CP corridor, and it extending the Iron Horse Trail back out so it connects to Mill. And then as it relates to public realm, I think you can see here a key one was really looking at the ecological restoration of Schneider and Shoemaker Creek. I'm going to get into that a little bit more detail just in a moment. Looking for new park and plaza spaces, particularly that come along with new developments. And I think we wanted to take the advantage of the proximity to the creeks to look at special provisions here, which are really about weaving in green infrastructure throughout new development and larger sites to help to actually deal with some of those issues of stormwater management. So just zooming in on, I think, one of the real key public realm directions here, this is facilitating the ecological restoration of Schneider and Shoemaker Creek. You can see by pulling out some of the development adjacent to the creek, which right now is basically just a concrete culvert, there creates an opportunity to balance a number of key objectives, creating a new central open space that can help to sort of organize new development, permitting higher density developments on either side of the creek corridor that can really take advantage of that setting, and really creating a much better setting for Iron Horse Trail, which runs basically alongside the culvert in this area. The plans, I think it's important to say that this wasn't just a sort of planning exercise that didn't have a bit of technical rigor to it. Technical evaluation was completed. It looked at everything from heritage impact to parks and public space needs. Floodplain implications was a big consideration in all the work that was done. There was a transportation analysis, noise analysis, and also an infrastructure assessment to make sure that what was being proposed could actually be handled over the fullness of time. The outcomes of all the key strategies and directions are, I think, captured in a preferred land use plan. And this is a plan that I think you can see demonstrates quite a mix of uses, a preservation of both employment and residential, focus on sort of active frontages in strategic locations right around the station areas there. And this will be something that's implemented over time through a secondary plan and zoning bylaw amendment, so there's going to be continued sort of discussions and work around that. I did also say I wanted to get into the Schneider Creek floodplain. You see the great big park there. I think that's a specific response to some of the challenges that the station area faces with respect to flooding. And I think one of the most innovative things that I've really seen in a while as it relates to floodplain planning has been put forward here. And this is the GRCA's recommended sort of approach to the floodplain, where what they've done is they've divided it into a series of quadrants, which I think you can see here. They're numbered, they're outlined in black. And the approach has been that if you pull buildings out of the floodway in red, land which is currently in the floodway, which is in yellow, could get redesignated to candidate sort of flood fringe. And that would provide additional permissions with respect to new development and uses there. So I think it's a great balancing act, one that sort of helps to mitigate the risks against the flooding, but also recognize that this is a place that we want new density development and mix of uses to occur over time. And I think a very innovative and appropriate response for this station area. recognizing that there are a couple large sites which could take advantage of this approach, the station area plan also puts in place some thinking around what might happen to those areas should they pull out of the floodway and take advantage of that with respect to new development. And so there is recommendations with the plan, this one focusing on the MTD site, for the type of new connections that might go there, where we might have new open spaces and the character to those, and the form and use that would be most appropriate. So with that, I'm going to pass this on to Tina to discuss the staff recommendations for this.
Thank you, Craig. The staff recommendation that you see on the screen was the one that was contained in the staff report. Planning staff met with some property owners earlier today, and as a result, we're proposing a couple of bullet points under the recommendation that you have in front of you. The first bullet point relates to the mobility map, and we're suggesting that the shared parking icon that is shown on that map be removed. There was some miscommunication and misinterpretation of what that actually meant, so we think it's easier if that icon was removed from the map. It's something that we can deal with through the implementation tools, such as the zoning bylaw, in terms of shared parking arrangements. And the second recommendation relates to the preferred land use plan. And there's a parcel of land, or 3 properties on Mill Street, that were shown in different scenarios as different land uses. One of the scenarios showed it as innovation employment. One scenario through the public process showed it as mixed use, high density. And so staff made a recommendation in this plan in terms of putting forward innovation employment. We heard from the property owners today that they would actually prefer the mixed use. So we would put that forward to you today for your consideration. And the other parts of the recommendation remain as is.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernandez, Davey, and Unesky, are you're ringed in for questions for staff? Okay. And Etherington, we're going to go, we have 3 delegates registered. We're going to go straight to the delegates, and you can ask your questions to staff afterwards. I'll just keep you in the queue of the same order. Okay. With our first delegate, just to remind our delegations that pursuant to Council's procedural bylaw, delegates are permitted to address the committee for a maximum of 5 minutes. And our first delegate is Mr. Glenn Shields from the GSP Planning, Inc. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of committee. I'll be brief given the late hour here. I think this is a really great plan. Tina and Brandon, Craig, Melanie put a great effort into this, and we've got a plan that tackles the big issues really in this area and sets the stage, I think, for some great re-urbanization to take place. There's a series of recommendations in the report too that are going to form the basis for the amendments that will come forward later on. And really, those, I think, are going to have to get some further discussion, and I've been talking to staff about that. So we know it's not the end of the road, but the devil's in the details, and we've got to make sure that now we can implement this great plan. So in my letter, I just touched on a couple of the land use designations. I'm not going to go through those in details. But certainly one of the major issues with any redevelopment project, especially in an emerging or pioneering area like this, is dealing with all of the costs and the fees and the charges. And one that's recommended in the report is a parkland dedication fee. And that's recommended at a rate of 1 hectare per 500 units. So that's going to have significant implications for projects. And again, these are projects in areas where there is going to be a lot of cost. There's costs of demolition. There's costs of cleanup from older industrial sites. There's costs for new infrastructure. And adding a parkland cost onto that is certainly a significant cost as well. So I don't know what the answer is, but as I discussed with Brandon today, we've got to sit down and look at a comprehensive strategy for this area that takes into account perhaps some dedication, looks at existing facilities and making improvements to those, maybe making great use of the flood fringe that we've got in this area for new park space as well. But really coming up with a specific program that's going to work and not be a burden on development. And sort of by way as an example, we went through the same challenge over on the Victoria Common project over on St. Ledger Street. Again, same kind of thing, applying these kind of traditional park dedication approaches just didn't work, and we had to come up with a customized program that really looked at what we were doing and looked at the privately owned but publicly accessible open space that was being provided as well. So great plan, and look forward to discussing this through with staff and coming up with great implementation tools down the road.
Okay. Thank you, Glenn. We do have a question for you. Councillor Yaneski.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Shields. Just a simple question, basically. Are you basically here to look at the merits of this particular plan, the parts plan, and the policies and the principles of it? Or also, and maybe or, do you also have clients that are in this particular area that have maybe an interest of being affected, and you are representing them, although not at this particular stage in any application, but are you sort of hired to represent their needs in terms of the overall future policies?
It's a bit of both. Our office is now working on a couple of properties in the area and working towards getting applications prepared.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
And we have no further questions for you, Glenn. Thank you. Our next delegation is Mike Pupulu from Polycor, or Polycor Inc.
Polocor, close enough.
Polocor?
Polocor, yes.
Like as in the polo shirt?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll keep this short because we spoke with staff earlier today. I'm Mike Pupulu. I'm from Polocor Inc. I'm here representing our interest as far as landholders. We own about approximately 2 acres of land near the Mill Street stop, which is designated mixed-use high density right now. We sent out a letter on December 1st, just for wanting some clarity on a few points on the Rockway plan. We met with city staff this morning, both Brandon and Tina, and we commend them for the quick turnaround time to address our concerns. They've all been addressed, so with that in mind, we are in support of the Parts Rockway plan.
Okay, Mike. We don't have any questions, so thank you. Oh, we do have one for you.
Okay.
Councillor Fernandez.
Sorry, I just realized that what you're speaking to is part of the amended recommendation. So your property that you own is 531, 541, and 543?
No, we own 469 to 45 Mill Street.
Okay. And what is the land use identification for your properties right now?
It's mixed use high density.
And you're fine with that?
We're fine with that, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank
Our
you.
only consideration was regarding the shared parking. We were a little foggy on what the shared parking entailed, and Craig and Brandon and Tina clarified that for us.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Our next delegate is Mr. Michael Brisson.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. So it's budget time. Your concern about tax resources has been mentioned a few times today. The message I'd like to leave with you are that you can't afford this, what I see as the process here, which to some extent is what colloquial is called redesigning the wheel. So as everyone that we vote for and elect, you've got a difficult task. You have to work with limited staff resources to accomplish major challenges. So what I'd like to suggest, you're looking here, as I, as a professional in this field, have been stunned by the incredible quality of the work that and I don't know them personally like I know architects that I'll tell you about the City Hall, Craig and Melanie, who I met for the first time, and I see the quality of this work. It is outstanding. Now, I'll make it brief. What I'd like to suggest to you is go immediately back to them and have them move specifically into your secondary plan. They're independent, they're not from this community, okay? Allocate your staff resources more to explaining it to the community, to people like Mr. Shields and the vested interests in the property. That applies in general to the planning process. A number of you have mentioned, what about transitions in the last session between high buildings and established low neighborhoods? You need to take your staff and have them begin to move beyond these plans and talk to the people in the lower neighborhoods about how that transition is going to take place. And you need to have these excellent consultants move more directly into precise guidelines of building types and heights, etc. That's how you can get it done with the amount of money that you have. Now, briefly, regarding the City Hall, I know it's not the item, okay, that I'm here to talk about, but I listened to the discussion. My suggestion to you is if you haven't already, go back to the architects of this project. You've passed a general guideline about what your concerns are, and you've said you've got some money to spend. Get them to take a look at it, or at least give them the opportunity to repair and or alter the building. If they're not interested, or you don't have a good relationship with them, go to the other architects that you know that you've worked with. For instance, on the library, you have Phil Carter and you have Jenna, both of them. I know all of these people. Talk to Bruce about this one. The point I'm trying to make is the same as with these professionals. Hire the best professionals for the task and try to limit, in terms of the tax dollars that you have to spend, the go-between between your local staff and yourselves that I saw you struggling with, like about the City Hall Square. If you hire people like this, or you hire any of the architects I've mentioned, and if they're not interested, ask me, I'll talk them into working for you. I know them personally, okay? Take these best people to help you deal with the City Hall and deal with the planning, because you need to have your excellent staff talking to the citizens in the neighborhoods and explaining to them the excellent work that they're doing. Thanks. Oh, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. We don't have any questions for you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so we have questions for staff. So Councillor Fernandez is first, and then Councillor Davey, and then Councillor Etherington. Can you click in Etherington? And then Zay, can you just click in? I just unclicked you. Okay. So Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, I just want to have from the looks of all of the maps, I don't know if Rockway Gardens has been included in this proposal, and how this plan affects Rockway Gardens. Is there anything in this proposal?
Yeah,
Not yet.
throughout the process, the boundaries were revised based on feedback, and so it did pull out. And Rockway Gardens, you can see, is just on the side of the study area there.
Right. So, I mean, on the one page that I'm looking at, on 21, I see that the golf course is just outside of this planning area, but and so that would also affect Rockway Gardens. Okay, thanks. Because I wanted to make a point that I think it's important that as we're making it pedestrian friendly and walkable, it would be great if people could leave those transit stations and get easy access to Rockway Gardens as well as, I mean, it's such a wonderful amenity and a great space that people can just sit and relax and play chess if they want to on a lovely day. The other question was around the conservation of the existing neighborhoods, and that was on page 31. Is that not already built into our REAMS guidelines that we have? Residential. No?
Through the chair, if I may, I think these are probably already addressed through a number of documents that you have. However, we thought it was very important in the context of so much proposed change to just be right up front and reaffirm the importance of protecting these stable neighborhoods. It's very critical, obviously, as you understand, to provide that full mix of housing.
Right, and it was one of the areas that we did a bus tour with, and so I think it's really important for us to maintain the integrity of that as we see the intensification happen because of the transit. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I'm looking at page 65, and just, again, this is far from my understanding in general in terms of municipal responsibilities, but page 65 is essentially the preferred plan that we're looking at. Is that correct? In terms of zoning?
Yes. Through the chair, if I may, yes, this is the preferred land use plan, which will carry forward through the zoning bylaw update.
Okay. So I have a question regarding the established low-rise residential. There's about a couple dozen parcels here in proximity to the ION stops. Are any of these heritage protected?
Through the chair, if I may, could I just ask a question of clarification? Can I ask whereabouts you're referring to here?
I'm looking at the page 65 and all of the, I guess, pale yellow parcels. Are any of those heritage protected?
There were some heritage resources here, but I don't believe any of those specifically fell under that designation.
Okay. So my layman's perspective in looking at this is that I look at both of the stops there, and when we originally started looking at within walking distance of about 10 minutes, I see established neighborhoods being protected here that are 4 minutes-ish roughly when I looked at Google Maps from ION stops. So I guess my question is, who are we protecting here by keeping these established low-rise residential neighborhoods zoned as they are?
Through the chair, if I may, what you're protecting for, I don't know if it's you're protecting a particular person, what you're protecting for is a station area that over time evolves to have a full range of housing choice and opportunity for people. I think where we want to end up, and I think this is something that we heard loud and clear through the consultation, was a station area that had high-rise development, had that sort of missing middle development, had low-rise new development that came along with it, as well as some of the established single detached neighborhoods. I think it's that broad mix that will give this place longevity and will be important to contributing and making sure that its current character in these special places gets retained over the longer term.
Okay, is there a danger in preserving these areas that we could end up pushing? Because one thing I constantly hear from residents is they don't want to see terribly intense structures going up in the suburbs. So by preserving these areas here, are we putting additional pressure on areas outside of the city for further intensification?
I think that there is more than enough development that has been illustrated. Through the chair, I feel that there's more than enough development incorporated into this plan to accommodate quite a substantial amount of new use. You could build this plan out for years.
Does the region provide input in terms of planning when it comes to these sorts of issues, especially since it's their transit project that we're planning around?
The region obviously does provide guidance at a higher level through the regional official plan, and this is in conformity with the guidance provided there. A number of years ago, the region also went through a process called the Region of Waterloo Community Building Strategy, and it looked at the corridor, the ION corridor in its totality, and started to identify the opportunities for change and new development and placemaking along the corridor, and the outcomes of that process, which was highly consultative as well, were embedded within the thinking around this station area.
Okay, so in essence then, the region's actually okay with having low-rise residential 4 minutes from their, $1 billion transit system. That's okay with them at this point? Okay.
Yes, I think the intent is to make sure that there's sufficient density to support the transit, and this plan delivers that.
Okay, I'm running out of time, but I make you back in. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, a couple of questions. The main one that our planners have heard before from me, probably I wanted to ask them whether they're satisfied that first of all, that the stable neighborhoods in my ward, most of this Rockway study is in my ward, will be protected. I've heard the words. I just wanted to ask them, hear from them, how they see that happening, especially when I consider the line of questioning here. And my second part of that question is that something that concerns me, that along the LRT route, especially in this area, we have a whole mass of what I consider affordable housing. And I'm not talking about, although that would be very nice, I'm not talking about subsidized low-cost housing. I'm talking about affordable housing within our city that forms part of the Rockway plan. And so my second part of that question, are they satisfied that along this part of the LRT route, we are going to maintain that level of housing affordability? That's my first question. It's a double-barreled one.
Thank you. Through the chair, one of the key considerations, again, for incorporating the key direction around preserving the established neighborhoods was to make sure that the intent of that was very, very clear, and that it was supportive of existing policies which help to protect stable neighborhoods within the city. As it relates to affordable housing, these transit investments do create a real challenge with providing affordable housing and making sure it stays affordable. I think we've all seen neighborhoods turn over and get gentrified. And so one of the provisions that have been identified in this plan has been the recommendation that I believe there's a 20% affordable housing allocation that comes forward with new development to try to help to maintain and preserve some of the affordability of this neighborhood. Does that solve everything? Probably not, but I think it is something that provides a bit of help with that respect. And it could be implemented through a range of different measures over time, and I'm sure the details of that will get worked out through the secondary plan update and the zoning.
And to supplement that, Mr. Chair, we have a policy, a recommendation in the stationary plan to incorporate policies to require a minimum amount of affordable housing in the focus areas of both the Borden and Mill Street stops. So we do recognize that we need to provide affordable housing, especially in the focus areas close to the station stops. And also Craig alluded to that we do have a target that we're imposing through the secondary plan of a minimum 20%. That's what we'd like to see as a target for the station area. So we're trying and recognizing that the established neighborhoods will provide another means of housing. In order to keep that affordable, there will be some minor intensification that is allowed in those stable neighborhoods. So it could be addition of a second dwelling unit, a garden suite, some sort of upgrade to the home to provide additional dwelling units that would be permitted within those areas.
My second question, and I think I'm going to have to ring back in, Mr. Chair, but my second question, this plan seems to reveal, and I don't think it's any secret, that there's a fairly drastic shortage of neighborhood parks throughout this study area. How are you going to solve that problem?
Yes, through the chair, the lack of public open space was something that has been identified as a real challenge of this station area. And for that reason, there was a number of recommendations that have come forward, and I think you'll probably have to draw on a suite of different tools to try to rebalance those needs over time. So one of the first, I'm just trying to make sure I give you the right wording here. Throughout the plan, the opportunity for new public spaces has been identified. And I think that the language in the plan is one that tries to sort of support those coming throughout. There are also a number of, and I think if you refer to the land use plan, look at the priority sites. Oh yeah, here they are. Priority parkland acquisition areas. And so those are areas where significant change is expected to take place over time. And so the recommendation for those areas has been to keep your 1 per 500 parkland dedication to make sure that you actually get those and that you get those on site as opposed to sort of in lieu from those. The challenge is for this area is that there are many sites that are smaller, and extracting public open spaces from them will be very, very difficult because it'll actually make the development unfeasible. And so, there it will be, working with the GRCA to try to support the renaturalization of the Schneider Creek corridor as a key step towards that, working to improve connectivity to the significant number of open spaces that are just outside the study area. It's tough when you draw a boundary. You kind of miss the park right next door or the opportunity right next door to connect to. And maybe through some of that renaturalization work, there might be some strategic acquisitions that are required that could also help to contribute to that. None of those are a silver bullet. I think it will require kind of making sure you get the open spaces on the big site, and then using the rest of your suite of tools that have been identified in here.
Thank you. I'm over my time, but I'll ring back in. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Yaneski.
In your report on pages 14 and 15 of the big document, very colorful and very well put together, I'm trying to understand the boundary limits of the report and then of the 3 alternative scenarios. And you include some lands in like the auditorium area in one, but you deleted another. You include the areas of around the Concordia Club lands and deleted another area. Lands along Mill Street, partially included and partially deleted. Help me understand why would you just look at the whole picture for all of those lands? Why are some added and some excluded?
Yeah, that's a good question. Through the course of the process and some of the workshops, it became clear that, looking at a site such as the auditorium site is actually an exercise that really needs to be done on its own. It's a very complicated issue. You have to think about how it gets used, programming, the neighborhoods, and so the thinking was that is actually something that's best dealt with through another process. Now, having said that, the removal of the odd lands from the study area didn't mean that they were blocked out of the mind or the thinking as it relates to the station area plan, and so there was quite a bit of thinking about the connection between the board and stop and the odd. I think it's a similar circumstance as we went down King Street. We started getting further and further away from the station, and then the thinking was, well, actually, is this something that is a bit distinct from the areas closer to the station and really more deserving of having a sort of separate sort of look outside of the station area planning process? As it relates to south of the corridor, in some of these options, we had the lands in. In some of the options along Cortland, in some of the options we had them out. At the end of the day, they were included as part of the study area, and the reasoning behind that was, along Mill Street there. The reasoning behind that was that the redevelopment of the Schneider site is a very important and strategic one, and it couldn't be considered in absence of understanding what was going to be happening on the other side of the railway corridor from it. And so in that instance, we decided to sort of wrap those lands in and carry them forward. So I hope that answers a bit of your question. It was really trying to understand some places that required further study on their own. In other cases, it was wrapping in lands that we thought were important to understand the development on basically the other side of a railway corridor.
So was this sort of rationale that you've explained, and I understand where you're coming from, was that between the two of you, or was that also as the influence of the property owners in the area said include me or don't include me? Did that have a factor at all?
It was actually a discussion that evolved through the community consultation with staff members and the key stakeholders. So, as an example, in the second PIC, we heard a lot of concerns about the folks that lived around the Odd, that it was such a large area and so much potential for change that they really wanted to see it considered in a bit more of its own kind of separate way, where they could have a targeted process looking at that. And so I think it was at that point that we, then you go back to city staff, and we had that discussion and suggested pulling it out.
So of the three scenarios you have, is there a preferred scenario? Because then you talked about the land use on page 65, and that's got a different boundary as well. Is that the scenario of land use we're looking at, or do we go back to page 15 and alternatives 1, 2, or 3? I don't know.
No, the preferred scenario is what you see on page 65. It's the preferred plan, is how it's been identified. That preferred scenario is neither 1, 2, or 3. It is a combination of all three of those, based again on feedback that was received through the consultation process in discussions with key stakeholders and city staff. So there was no perfect one in the first instance. We sort of refined our way to get to the preferred plan.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Councillor Yaneski. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question, and then I'll have a comment as well. Just in following up from the question from the delegation with respect to the parkland dedication, so we have it as 1 hectare per 500 units. Can you comment on how that compares to other municipalities, just so we have an idea?
That is a very difficult thing. We started to look at other municipalities when we were looking at the public space issue there. And I think what we came to the conclusion was, well, it's difficult to compare all the various communities. It's not an apples to apples sort of thing. This is a formerly industrial area that's got to go under significant change. And if you were to bring this back up to the standard of what you might find in a suburban neighborhood, you'd find that you're kind of blowing out opportunities for redevelopment and resulting in something that's probably not in keeping with a more transit supportive, higher density environment. So that doesn't really answer your question. We did look at that. We thought that the city sort of standard was probably appropriate and most achievable on here, but even with that standard, you're going to have to use all your tools to try to get closer to it.
Okay, could we get some of that information, some sort of comparative information? Because what the decision this committee needs to make is whether it's prohibitive or not, whether we're going to be stemming some development because of this request is too high. So could we get some of that information in time for council, perhaps?
Yes, I think we could.
In terms of comparison?
Yep.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. We do have a requirement in the Planning Act that we do need to take parkland dedication. That is a requirement of the Planning Act, so it's something that we can't get around. What we can do is find the creative means to do that, so it would either be a land dedication or a cash in lieu dedication. So what we would try to do is take the cash in lieu or look at the creative opportunities to get the actual land in this area. But we are required to take a parkland dedication through the Planning Act.
Okay, and that required to take parkland dedication, but does it explicitly stipulate 1 hectare per 500 units?
Yes, it does.
It does, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Etherington?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just one last question. I really like the vision in the Rockaway plan in relation to Schneider Creek and Shoemaker Creek. But I want to ask you how you're going to achieve that, especially on the former Schneider lands now being developed by Auburn. How are you going to achieve that when I'm already starting to see glimmers of what I would call pushback from the developer on the use, the potential beautiful use of those 2 creeks in that area? Big question. How are you going to deal with that?
So, with a site like the Schneider site where there is going to be the requirement for new open space, I think it is about thinking about where you locate that open space in a way that helps to contribute to the creek system. And I think the plan has carefully tried to make sure that it did align that with Shoemaker Creek, so that it could sort of balance the requirement for the new open space, but at the same time contribute to the creek corridor. As it relates to Schneider Creek, I think one of the appealing things about the GRCA approach to the flood issue there was it's a bit of a carrot and a stick approach. Right now, because of the update of flood mapping, a lot of development opportunity has been sort of erased from the site. And the GRCA approach is basically one that says, well, if you pull back from that core floodway, you can get additional permission to sort of develop your land. So in that respect, I think it is something that will help to entice and support the renaturalization of that creek corridor over time by giving the developers additional density and permissions.
That's interesting. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Etherington. I have a few questions. When we're designing parts in general, the plan for all the central parts, what is the time frame with regards to these parts? Like, what is the time frame? Like, are we looking at, is this a 20-year plan for us? Does this go along with our official plan every 20 years?
These plans are very long-term plans. Their ultimate build-out as to when that will happen, it could be 20, it could be 50, it could be 75 years. It's an ultimate build-out of the land, so it will not happen within the time frame of the official plan. A lot of the objectives and tools are over the long term, so it's difficult sometimes to put these into policies in an official plan because that's a 20-year time frame document. So it's difficult to answer that question. It is a long-term plan, and it's the ultimate build-out vision for the community.
Okay, so are we going to come back in time in, like, let's say 10, 15 years and reevaluate this and see where things are progressing? Or how are we going to do this?
We are going to implement this plan through a new secondary plan in the official plan, and those plans come up for review every 5 years. So we will look at and make sure that we're implementing the vision and that it's current for the day of the secondary plan.
Okay. My other question is in regards to, in a perfect utopian planning society, and I know this is not perfect, do we not set certain weights on certain zones so that there's a complete balance? So, like, let's say there's 100% mixed use, there's 100% agriculture, or there's 20% agriculture, 20% mixed use, you know, like, is there a set template? Because I know that's not how it is, but I just have concerns, because when I'm seeing there's a balance here, and I'm struggling with it.
No, their answer is there is certainly no template to the right mix of uses, and that template should change, or that mix of uses should change on every single station you have along the line in response to the very specific characteristics of each station area. In this station area, I think we had a strong, good, healthy dialogue with the community around what does it mean to be a transitioning industrial place that had a live-work characteristic, and how can you kind of carry that forward and in a more contemporary fashion that increases the density and provides a greater mix of uses and amenity to residents and employees. And I think the result is sort of what you see in the preferred land use, something that has a lot more mixed use, something that preserves employment areas, but also lower density, stable neighborhoods and as well. So it's a very specific response to this station area.
Okay, thank you for that. There is no further questions to staff, so do I have someone that's going to move this? Okay, Councillor Fernandez is going to move it. Comments we're going to go into. Mayor Urbanovic.
Just very quickly, I want to acknowledge all of the work that's been done by staff, by the industry, by planning consultants that have engaged in the process and so on to get this document before us today. I think it does, in many ways, strike the right balance. There are obviously a few issues that we need to work on, including the whole issue of parkland going forward. I think it is extremely important, and this plan addresses that we continue to offer a wide variety of housing types and choices as we go forward. So we know that these existing neighborhoods are going to continue to exist. At the same time, we're providing opportunities for townhomes, for mid-rise, for high-rise, and so on, and that is going to be key. I think we are, and I share Councillor Etherington's concerns around making sure that affordability is key. And when we're talking about affordability, we're not just talking about subsidized housing, but we're also talking about affordable working class housing. And that was a important distinction that came out of the recent national housing strategy that has come forward from the federal government. And so I think as that evolves and as we see how those details come out, I think it's going to be important that we look to see how that can be incorporated into the work that we're doing, and then, quite frankly, pushing the development community towards that. And I think it's also important that as these areas develop, we continue to push the development community to not just be building housing for, let's say, young individuals starting out, or those who are, older adults looking to perhaps move into a condo as a lifestyle choice, but in fact that this variety of housing types is also available for families as an option, whether they choose or can afford a single family dwelling versus a condo or versus a townhouse and so on. And I think that's going to be extremely important as we go forward as well.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge the work of staff. I know this is it's a huge challenge to work through this and figure out how the various pieces of the puzzle work. Having said that, I'm not going to support it at this time. I have a week to think about it coming back to council, but my concern really is I guess I don't fundamentally believe that we should have a variety of housing types within an ion station zone. I think we have the rest of the city. to have a variety of housing types. I think that if we're going to have more sustainable development, we need to make sure that we have as many properties available open to more intensification within these locations. I do personally think it's a mistake to have established neighborhoods that aren't heritage protected. If there's heritage protection, absolutely, there's no question. But I think it's a mistake when there's no other rationale other than an established neighborhood not to look at having more intense development if you're within 4 minutes of an LRT stop. And my final rationale, and this is I guess is more of a personal thing, but I truly do believe that we've got about maybe 15 years before we see the development of technologies, whether it's driverless vehicles and off-the-grid type of electrical support, where there's really a good case for residents to move close to these sort of static transit locations. So when we're looking back 15 years from now, I'd rather deal with a situation where there's too much intensity around these stops than not enough.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Having been a part of this process from the beginning and involved in many of the discussions, I am very pleased to see this report and very happy to support it today. I am especially excited to see the push towards increasing the support for active transportation considerations and as well as the vision to re-naturalize the creek areas, creating a complete street along Kent Street. These are all exciting and needed ideas. It's telling that we don't have neighbors who are here to oppose the plan because the plan has been very much considering everybody's feedback. I think that some of the bits of feedback that we have had from landowners and planning consultants can be worked out through the secondary planning process, where details about specific properties can be worked out. I do want to mention that I am also a little bit concerned about the talk around trying to ensure we have no established neighborhoods near the LRT stop areas, because we have to consider that the residential areas, the low-rise single-family home areas that we already have discussed at length through the RIAN study they are endeared. They are very much a part of the fabric of the city of Kitchener. They are essential to be considered as a part of the parts area, because we need to have a wide range of housing options, not just high-density areas where people can walk or cycle to where they are going from their homes. When we look at major cities around the world with much higher density than we have, including Vancouver, Toronto, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, we have low-rise, single-family homes right in the areas where there's transit infrastructure offered, like major transit infrastructure such as our LRT, and that works in other municipalities. We are by no means ready to just go into established neighborhoods and stick high-rises in the middle of a residential street. We're not ready for that. I am a big fan of looking for ways for us to find more space for the missing middle, more space for stacked townhouses, more ability to go from the arterial roads with high density to the low-rise residential areas. That we need to find that missing middle and work towards that. I think that's going to be in the next 4 years something that we should really look towards planning around. But for now, this parts plan is where we need to land. It's the right balance.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh, Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just without repeating Councillor Marsh's comments, I too share her comments. I feel very strongly that we have to make certain that we ensure on this council a good mix of affordable housing along LRT routes and not just high-priced condos. That housing should be particularly in areas like Rockaway and Midtown. And I would quickly say, in relation to comments from some people on this council, that does not mean that I'm opposed to intensification. I think there is a place for those high-rise, expensive condos, and people should certainly have the ability to buy them or rent them. But that type of development, I don't see any place for that type of development in our older neighborhoods, which we have to preserve. And I'm not just talking about heritage neighborhoods. We should certainly preserve those, but there are lots of areas in Rockaway that need our protection, and we have to preserve those areas and protect them from the type of high-rise development we're talking about, more appropriately on the former Schneider site.
Okay, I see no further comments. I will make my comments. I tend to agree with Councillor Davey, and to me it's mind-boggling that we have a transit station that the region's okay with, that has basically low stable neighborhoods, which I like to call stable neighborhoods, which we should call it /heritage, because that's how we're protecting these neighborhoods. I think it goes along. I think it is contrary to what the ION is and everything else that represents the ION. But that's my opinion, and with that, we call a recorded vote. It has me clicked in as. Oh, this is you. This would be you. All those in favor, please stand up. Opposed? That's carried. Okay, thank you. Councillor Singh?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the next item has been just deferred to a later time. It wasn't a time-sensitive item, and keeping with us being behind schedule, I think that's the appropriate action. So those were the items, all the items in the first part. And then the as publicly advertised meeting will start afterwards. So we will take some recess for having dinner and caucus, and hopefully we will reconvene as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So we'll reconvene special council and caucus.
Okay.